Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Well, I can't tell you how excited I am. It's the relaunch of the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast with me, Greg Gaston. Yes, a name that you're probably familiar with. And if you're not, you hear me Monday through Friday on Sports 56 mornings from 7 until 10. But you've probably seen me or have heard me on Tigers broadcasts, whether I do sideline reporting for the Tigers radio network, or maybe you've seen me on ESPN Plus doing Tigers men's basketball and Tigers women's basketball, baseball as well, also live streaming baseball games, and over the years, many different networks that I've done games on, but all involving the University of Memphis. And then I came to Memphis back in the mid-90s as the sports director at ABC 24 and CW 30, and then went on to Fox 13, and then on to Sports Files for a number of years. So I'm very familiar with the sports scene here in Memphis, having been here for, now nearly 30 years. And I'm very excited to be asked to be a part of this Tigers podcast, which is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk weekly about the University of Memphis with the emphasis on Tigers football and Tigers men's basketball. And we're going to have some of the great staff members from here at the Daily Memphian, including Frank Bonner, who we'll introduce in just a moment, including Parth Upadhyay when we're talking men's basketball, and my good friend Tim Buckley, the deputy sports editor and senior writer here at the Daily Memphian. So let's get right into it. I hope you'll enjoy it. I think you will. Let's talk some Tigers athletics. This man needs no introduction. He's done a great job since arriving in Memphis. He's the Tigers football beat writer for the Daily Memphian. He's Frank Bonner. Hey, Frank.
Hey, how's it going? I appreciate you hopping on this new relaunch with us, Greg.
I'm excited about it. You've been on my radio show a number of times. I enjoy reading what you have to write, what you have to say about Tigers football. And boy, I'll tell you, the last several years, the importance of everything that's going on with the university, with realignment talk, now with the stadium issue. My gosh, we got a lot of different topics, but I want to get to right away what's happening on the football field. Here's a team, as you know, Frank, that last year had a chance to have a really, really good year. And they had a good year if you look at making it to another bowl game. But they weren't able to finish some games, as you know. Had leads, lost those leads, could have won 9 games. And the motto this year has been just finish. Just finish games. And last Thursday, we saw the Tigers just finish. It wasn't pretty as they beat Navy 28-24. So 3 games. They've played against an overmatched Bethune-Cookman team, which they won easily, against what ended up being an overmatched Arkansas State team, which they won on the road easily, and then a hard-fought win over Navy 28-24. 3-0, 3 games. But Frank, how good is this team? Do you know?
No, I think looking at the 3 opponents that you just named, you expect Memphis to be 3-0 at this time. And so going into the Missouri game, this is the first season that they're an underdog, I think that's when you'll know. You don't really know how good they can be when they've beat teams that everybody expects them to beat. You have to wait and see when they play a toss-up game or a game where they're an underdog, and you can kind of see how they fight through something like that.
You have a veteran quarterback in Seth Hennigan, so a lot of high expectations for him to put up big numbers, to not make mistakes. How do you think he's played so far through 3 games?
You know, he hasn't played his best, right? There were moments, especially in that Navy game, that interception late in the fourth quarter where you've got to eliminate that. And so there still is room for Seth to have to grow from where he started this season to where they need him to be going into conference play. But he hasn't played horrible, right? Obviously, he's played well enough for them to be 3-0. But to his standard, there's a lot more in the tank for a guy like Seth.
In the Navy game, we saw the explosiveness from a running back, which we have not seen in a while. That's the transfer Blake Watson. Is it too early to say Blake Watson may be in that next long line of great running backs that have come through Memphis, like Antonio Gibson, Tony Pollard, Kenneth Gainwell, and so many more? Or can you right now anoint him as the guy?
Well, I do think that in terms of playmakers, you can anoint him as the guy, as their best playmaker at this point in time. But to put him in the stratosphere of some of those other running backs that have come before him, 3 games into the season isn't a large enough sample size to start having that conversation about him, because we've seen, at least since I've been here, I remember when Brandon Thomas had that game against Arkansas State, and we were having the same conversation, and it really didn't pan out that way. And so we've got to see a little bit more from Blake Watson to put him in that conversation. But in terms of who do you think their biggest playmaker is this year, I think it looks like it's going to be Blake Watson. And I'm curious to see when he goes up against an SEC defense in Missouri, will he be able to sustain what we've seen so far?
Yeah, knock on wood, he stays healthy, because as you mentioned with Thomas, a couple of years ago, got out to this great start, and then injuries derailed him.
Right.
And those injuries occurred last year as well, and he's sitting there probably 4th or 5th on the depth chart, but still a part of this program. Offensively, they made a lot of changes in the offseason with their receivers. It's basically a whole new core. You got Toski Dove, who came from Missouri, and now will be playing against his former team this Saturday. From a receiving standpoint, what have you seen through 3 games with this receiving core, which, again, is basically a complete overhaul?
Well, for one, I think, and Seth even mentioned this, like in his first year, right, he had Calvin Austin. And defenses knew that Calvin Austin was the guy, and everybody honed in on Calvin Austin. Well, if you look at this year, you've seen big plays from Demir Blankumsey. You've seen big plays from Rock Taylor. Toski Dove has had a couple of big plays. Joseph Skates, Kobe Drake looks good. And so now they look like a more well-rounded receiving core, as opposed to like having one top-tier guy and then it kind of falls off from there. So from an overall offensive perspective, I think having that many guys who you can count on as opposed to just one top dog is beneficial when defenses are trying to game plan.
Is it too early to gauge if this offensive line is going to be good enough to open up holes for these running backs to protect for Hennigan when they play stiffer competition starting this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's too early. I mean, going back to our point about the 3-0 record, right? There's not much you can take from the dominance of a Bethune-Cookman or an Arkansas State. Obviously, Navy was a step up in competition, but you still want to see this 3-game stretch we'll answer those questions, right? When they play Missouri, Boise, and Tulane, then we'll have the answers about the offensive line. We'll have the answers about how good this team really is. And so I think the time frame of expectation is still a little bit too soon to kind of start making those assessments.
It seems to me, and maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, that the strength of this team is the defense. And other than the first half against Navy, where for some reason they forgot how to tackle, and Navy does that to you sometimes, but they've been a really good, solid defensive team, getting pressure on quarterbacks. Simeon Blair has been a difference maker in the secondary, and even though they lost Q from last year, a big loss, who's now with the Detroit Lions, I think Matt Barnes' team has a defense that can compete and defend well against the better opponents this year. Yeah,
I mean, if you remember the offseason, everybody's been talking about this defense heading into the year, and I've said in one of our articles that I think this will be the best defense that I've seen since I've been on the beat. And it looks like that in the first 3 games. I know there were a couple hiccups against Navy, but I mean, in that fourth quarter, the defense won the game. And so I do think that is going to be the strength. But even with a strong defense, there's going to become points in the game, whether it's against Missouri or Tulane or whoever, where you're going to need the offense to have a special drive. And I think Seth Hennigan is a quarterback to be able to lead the special drives in those moments. And I think once all that comes together, then that's when we can start seeing that, what's the ceiling for this team in terms of AAC standings.
Let's talk about the Tigers versus Tigers battle. As you mentioned, it's kind of murderer's row the next 3 weeks. This is a non-conference game. It's important. It's not as important as Tulane and SMU down the line. But a great opportunity against an SEC team coming off a win last weekend over nationally ranked Kansas State. For those who don't know, Frank, because the question continues to come up, even though it has been a while since the announcement was made that Memphis was not going to be able to host Missouri, that the game is going to be instead at a neutral site in St. Louis, although we know that's not neutral. Why did this happen?
So here's the thing about that. So, like, Memphis made the best case scenario in a tough situation, right? Missouri reached out to them a while ago about the buyout for not playing the game. Memphis wanted to keep an SEC opponent on the schedule, so instead of letting Missouri buy out a game for pennies on a dollar that was signed in the contract 10 years ago, Memphis decided to work something out with Missouri, move it to a neutral, so-called not neutral site, and they in return get $1 million. And so you keep an SEC opponent on the schedule, you get $1 million, and you still get to play the game, even though it's not at home. It's an opportunity for Memphis to kind of show what it's made of.
Jeff Crane, who's the University of Memphis deputy AD, as you know, told me today on my radio show they've sold over 2,000 tickets. That's a pretty good showing, and hopefully a lot more. That's through the Tiger box office. Who knows how many will go up to St. Louis, make it a big weekend, and buy tickets up there at the Dome. But it'll pale in comparison to Missouri and their contingent. They obviously own St. Louis, but for Memphis to have that many fans coming up, I think that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think Memphis is obviously going to need that, right? Because, like you said, we sit here and talk about a neutral site all day long, but it's a home game.
Right.
It's a home game. It's going to feel like a home game for Missouri. It's going to feel like an away game for Memphis. And so you want to see at least a strong pocket in that stadium of Tiger Blue if you're those coaches and you're those players to kind of help the team get off on the right foot early in the game.
How much do you know about Missouri? Brady Cook is a really good quarterback, and I know they got an explosive wide receiver, but I personally don't know a ton about them. What can you tell us about them?
Yeah, right. One thing I can say is that I watched that Kansas State game. Missouri looked pretty good against Kansas State. I mean, there's no they look like they playing with a lot of confidence. Obviously, Luther, the receiver, is like the guy, right? He's right
NFL
now
good.
Right now he's ranked 13th in the country in as a receiver, and so like obviously that's a guy you need to stop. And Memphis's defense, that defensive secondary, they have a lot of depth back there, so we'll see what that looks like. And then obviously, the quarterback play, right? He's against Kansas State, he looked pretty good, and so like that's why I said that like as good as the Memphis defense has to be, the Memphis offense kind of has to match that intensity that Missouri offense is going to bring.
The last time these two teams met wasn't pretty. Missouri put up, I think it was 66 points against a Mike Norvell team. So for those who think that, Missouri's middle of the road, maybe to the bottom of the SEC, don't think that for a second. Like you just said, they are a very capable team. So that means the Tigers, yes, match-wise, offensively, but they can't turn the ball over. They can't give Missouri these possessions and not cash in themselves. If that's the case, it will mark for a long evening in St. Louis.
Yeah, right. I mean, when you are the team, especially when you're an underdog team going on what is essentially a road game, you can't give that crowd an extra excitement and energy by turning the ball over and giving the other team extra possessions. And so that's obviously step number one, is protect the ball, especially when you get in that second half. If the game is close in that second half, you can't have a late game turnover in the way that they did against Navy, because Missouri is not going to let you redeem yourself if you do what you did against Navy late in the game.
Do you see much of a difference overall from the fan perspective? And this is me asking you, have you spoken to any of the supporters from Memphis from last year to this year? We were promised by Coach Silverfield explosiveness with the offense. We haven't seen that yet, but a lot is dictated by the defense, right? We saw, according to the coaching staff, Bethune-Cookman throw some wrinkles up there. Arkansas State do some things differently defensively. And obviously with Navy, you know what you're getting into. It's a physical war every single year. But compared to last year, obviously a few different players, and we talked about some of those receivers. Do you see any differences?
In terms of the explosiveness?
Yes.
I do. You look at a guy like Blake Watson. Not only did he have 2 69-yard runs against Navy, but what they're able to do with him in the passing game, I think helps. Like, what Cramsey wants to do is basically get the ball to their best players. And they've found a way to get the ball to Blake Watson in the open field, whether that's through the air or on the ground. And if you remember against Arkansas State, when Seth Hennigan had the play action that left Toski does wide open.
Right.
That play calling helped for that explosiveness. And so I do think that the explosiveness is a little different than last year. They made a point and emphasis in the transfer portal to bring those guys in. And so we've seen pockets of that. We would need to be able to see that on a bigger sample size to really see if this offense can consistently be explosive. But I do think they have the pieces to create those explosive plays that kind of flip the game in certain situations.
You into predictions?
I'll play the game.
So what do you think? It's tough, right?
Yeah, I'll say Missouri in a close one. I don't know like a score prediction, but I say 7 to 10 point loss for Memphis.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, look, I'm on the sidelines during the broadcasts on the Tiger Radio Network, and I'm going to sit here and tell you that I would be very surprised if they can pull it off. Can they pull it off? Yes. I think this is a lot different than it was several years ago when they got bombarded in Columbia. I think they can. But it's going to be, for the Tigers to win this football game, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and they're going to have to pick Cook off maybe once or twice, force some turnovers, win the turnover war. That doesn't guarantee you it, but I think they're going to have to do that to have a really good chance at pulling an upset.
But I'll tell you this, though, right? Like, it doesn't – obviously, Memphis fans and the players and coaches want to win every game. I don't necessarily think that Memphis has to beat Missouri in order for people to be excited about the potential of what this season can be. If they go and get beat by Missouri by 21, 28 points, then you like, okay, Memphis could be in trouble in terms of the rest of the year. But if you lose a 10-point game or even a 14-point game that was a one-possession game away somewhere in the fourth quarter, you can walk away from that game still feeling like Memphis has a shot to do what they need to do in the conference standing. Because from my vantage point, I don't want to say the conference schedule is out the window because it's not. They need to win enough games.
Sure.
But the bread and butter of the season is where you finish in the conference standings. And a win or a loss against Missouri does nothing to the conference standings.
Absolutely. I agree. And we just talked about kind of the murderer's row of the games against Missouri, Boise, Tulane. The most important game is Tulane.
Right.
You have them at home. You've had a great run of beating Tulane at home. It will not be easy. If they can win 2 out of these 3, look out at what the Tigers can do this year. It's going to be hard just to win 2 out of 3. Even think about it, just winning 1 game. But if you win 1, it better be Tulane.
I was going to say 2 out of 3 has to include Tulane,
right?
Like because that's the 1 out of 1 in terms of the conference games in that 3-game stretch. So you have to beat Tulane. I don't say you have to, but in terms of conference standings,
yes,
you want to beat Tulane, and if you can split Missouri and Boise. As a Memphis fan watching, I think they'll take that. They'll take a split between those 2 games.
You got Tulane at home. You have SMU at home. You don't play Texas, San Antonio. I know they've had some issues because Frank Harris has been hurt. They have Tennessee this weekend in Knoxville. But if you can do the damage that you have been doing over the years at home, they got a great run at home, you're going to be playing for the conference championship. And I think right now with fans – sure, they love going to the bowl games. The alternative is not good. But after a while, 6-6. You want to see more. And the way that Memphis can make the statement, we're going to talk here in just a second about realignment and things of that nature. You win the conference, or at least get to the conference championship game. You are taking that step up. There are some out there that are predicting that Memphis will play Alabama in the Peach Bowl. Wouldn't that be something? But one step at a time.
Yeah, and I think in order to get there, Seth, from day one as a freshman, he's came in and showed that, he's a guy who can run this offense. Seth has to play at a all-conference caliber level.
I agree.
And I think he will. If you can get that out of Seth with the weapons that Memphis has created for him, everybody talks about the defense. That's going to be the strength of the team. They won the game for Navy. But at the end of the day, that offense has to get turning consistently as you get deep into the schedule. And if they do that with the defense that they have, that's the special season they're looking for.
Great stuff, Frank. Hang in there. We're going to get my man over here, Tim Buckley, involved in the next topic, and that's a very important topic. Actually, two topics within one, because we're talking about the stadium issue here in Memphis, and the emphasis will be on Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. But that, in turn, could, and I say could, affect their standing down the road for continued realignment in college football. I know Tim's been all over these stories. So a lot has come out, Tim, in the last just several days of what's happening with the city, with Mayor Strickland, with the powers that be, not only with that $350 million from the state, but now other money that they are trying to add to suffice and to make sure that the Grizzlies are happy with what they will have for FedEx Forum, which in turn certainly affects the University of Memphis with basketball, but also for Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. So another proposal has been thrown out there, which would include more tax money, more bond money, but would have to get approval from certain people in the state, some of the things would have to get approved by the Grizzlies themselves. And we're getting closer to what seems like a deadline, or the delay will happen with the refurbishment and renovation of Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. So you can see people getting anxious, at least on the Tigers side. Where do things stand right now?
I think there's been a lot of people that have been anxious for a while. There was so much that's being done behind closed doors too. So do we know everything that's going on? No, absolutely not. But we know a lot more now. And you're talking about, as of right now, where things stand, $681.5 million in taxpayer funding. And that includes the Grizzlies throwing in $27 million and University of Memphis throwing in $5 million. From all indications, University of Memphis could come up with $5 million to do that. How much are the Grizzlies willing to throw in? Don't really know yet. And then it comes down to the question of allocation. Right now, on the mayor's proposal, $492 million to the renovation of FedEx Forum, $220 million to Liberty Stadium. Is that enough to satisfy either side? No. So you're still at a little bit of an impasse right now. And how all this is going to get settled is only compounded in terms of difficulty by the fact that Jim Strickland's second term in office expires at the end of December. In his ideal world, he'd love to have deals for all this wrapped up before he leaves office. Whether or not that's doable or not, we don't know, partly because the Grizzlies aren't being real public about things. I think we all wish they would. The city's not being real public about things. I think we all wish they would. We understand why both of them won't, because you don't want to negotiate through the media if you're in their position. Mm-hmm. Although as the media, we'd love to have them do it, and we welcome that.
Right here on this podcast.
Absolutely. But I don't think the University of Memphis really cares about any of that, because they've gone pretty public with what they're pushing.
But there is indeed a time crunch.
Well, there is on a number of fronts. One is, if a new mayor comes, when a new mayor comes in, who knows how they would see divvying up the money and negotiating with these sides and what they would want included or not included in the package. You have the $350 million in state allocation funds that you have to decide what to do with in a timely fashion. I think a lot of it's going to come to head in October, but a lot of it's going to be, what are the Grizzlies willing or not willing to concede? And then in terms of the time factor that you're talking about, you have the University of Memphis that wants to get this thing rolling because they're looking at the argument goes, higher costs in terms of construction and in goods and services and all of that, which is a very legitimate argument to hear, but also an argument that, if you thought about that sometime over the last 30 years, you could have held costs down quite a bit. But it seems like both sides are so far apart at this point that you got to wonder whether these deadlines really are going to get hit or not.
When we first heard about the state and the allocation of money for stadiums in Memphis, which included 4 projects, by the way, for those who don't know, AutoZone, there's Simmons Bank now, Liberty Stadium, FedEx Forum, AutoZone Park, and 901 FC / Mid-South Coliseum. It seemed like, I bring Frank back in for this, it seemed like it was kumbaya in the city. Yes, they're going to refurbish Simmons Bank, Liberty Stadium. It's going to look fantastic. Maybe that'll help the University of Memphis get to that Power 5 status that they like to be in. And for the Grizzlies, the most important entity in this city, to have an NBA team, they're going to be happy. They're not asking for a new stadium or a new arena. They are fine with refurbishment. Everybody was on the same page. Now, there is such a division, and it's getting nasty. And I'm not saying it's Grizzlies versus Memphis, but it's fan versus fan. All of a sudden now, as opposed to being together as sports fans in this community, there is a division between Tigers and Grizzlies fans.
Well, I think part of it is because once it came out that you realized that the pot wasn't big enough for all that, you had fans trying to talk about why the money should go here or there, and the conversation became which entity is most important to the city. And so when you get into that conversation, that's when the fans start having a riffraff because you've got, I saw stuff on Twitter about the city's team and this and that. And so that's when it got real ugly, when the conversation switched to which team is more important.
There's a school of thought out there, though, that it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Right.
And that's true, except that
the Grizzlies control it.
Somebody has to give. And at this point, the ones that have the most to give, it appears, is the Grizzlies. Now, whether they're going to be willing to give that or not, who knows? Because you know what? Part of this whole deal is, basically adding, in layman's terms, raising ticket prices to Grizzlies games at FedEx Forum.
Right.
And you can imagine that the Grizzlies are thinking, don't you think that if we could have afforded as an organization to raise ticket prices and get away with it, we would have already gone ahead and done that and thrown that into our pocket, as opposed to paying for the city-owned arena? So there's so much that the Grizzlies, it appears, are going to have to give on, whether it's that, whether it's how much they're throwing into the pot, whether it's how much the entire project's going to have to work, that you wonder, with the time constraints that you referenced earlier, when this is all gonna be settled, if it is in our lifetime. You and I, Greg. Well, I mean, Frank's fine.
Sure, he's fine.
But we got to worry, Greg.
Tim, the Grizzlies have been mum, as you've talked about and stated. They've been quiet on the subject. Even the mayor, who's come on my show several times, now I've been reaching out for him. Hey, he's not available. So he's gotten a little bit quiet and probably a lot anxious. What's the University of Memphis saying?
Well, I mean, they've gone very public with their campaign, and they want things to. They don't want things to start today. They don't want things to start tomorrow. They wanted things to start yesterday, last week, last month, because they want to get it going as soon as the Liberty Bowl is in the books. They want to have ground broken and things started over there. And right now they're not at that point yet. Now, you also asked, what are they saying? They're saying that, but beyond that, they're not saying much because they're very sparse on details.
They're stuck between a rock and a hard place,
right? Oh, absolutely. So, again, I think, to use a lousy basketball reference, the pun's in the Grizzlies' court. The pun, the ball's in the Grizzlies' court.
The Daily Memphian's terrific reporter, Sam Hardiman, has been talking about some of the local legislators have been on the mayor since the summer about getting this thing done. Yeah.
Of course, the primary one of them being a University of Memphis alum. No big shock there. But you know what? That's the kind of thing that politicians like that should be fighting for in terms of their constituency, because in the end, who is better off for it? A lot of people wonder, like, what do we get out of all of this and everything? Part of it is just civic pride. You want to say you have a pro sports franchise in your city. You want to say you have, a fancy stadium that can hold a whole bunch of people. Do you need a fancy stadium that holds a whole bunch of people? Yeah, for one night in December. So there's two sides to that argument as well. But yeah, the West Tennessee legislative people, they absolutely should be fighting for this. And to their credit, they are.
Now, don't get me wrong.
Some of them were.
Yeah, right. I believe it's going to happen. How much money will eventually be allocated to the Simmons Bank project, I don't know. There's going to be renovations. Something's going to happen. But Frank, the simple question is, do you believe that if there isn't any renovation to Simmons Bank, that gives Memphis no chance to get into a power conference? Whereas if there is, and even if it looks beautiful, it doesn't guarantee anything.
Yeah, I think Laird so much has said that way back, like before this money thing came on, and we were just, when they announced the renovations in the first place or whatever.
Laird Veach, the Tigers athletic director.
The athletic director, Laird Veach. I'm paraphrasing. Basically, what he said was that thing. He said that they felt not doing this to the stadium could be something that kept them out, and doing this to the stadium would better position them. But it wasn't necessarily like they were going to be guaranteed in. I think it was more so, if we didn't do this, we're almost guaranteed to not get in.
As we close down our first podcast, and again, the return to the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast, Tim, we also saw a story, and you guys had it at the Daily Memphian, about President Bill Hargrave and what the University of Memphis has done dating back to last February, I think, with the Brett Yormark conversations, texts, emails that President Hargrave had with him. He, of course, is the commissioner of the Big 12, trying to make sure he emphasizes all the positive things that Memphis is doing, the companies that are willing to come aboard, and things of that nature. Obviously, I don't want to say it fell on deaf ears, but it didn't work out, at least not now. They continue to say they're doing their due diligence. I think they're certainly doing an awful lot to try to get them in a positive position, so they're proactive rather than reactive. Do you think they're doing enough? Is there anything else they can do? Is it just one of those deals where no matter what they say, it's not going to work out, at least not now for the university?
Well, I don't think we really know what they're doing, to be honest with you. And look, I think they were under legitimate consideration. A lot of people don't believe this. I do, that they were under legitimate consideration for the Big 12. But once those four Pac-12 teams, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah decided to go, then it was forget about it.
Right.
I mean, that just knocked it out for them. But do we really know what Memphis is doing? There were public records requests. We got 4 emails, a 2-email exchange, and then another 2-email exchange between the commissioner and the president.
So not much substance.
Not much substance there. We got some text messages from the president of the university to the Baylor University president, Linda Livingstone, that was fairly casual or conversational in tone as well. Either A, if that's all that there's record of them doing, that's not a real assertive, aggressive attempt. B, they're holding back on what all they've really done in order to make a pitch for themselves. Is there a C out there? I don't know, but you got to believe they've been doing more than that. I suspect they're holding back, frankly, and I would love to know more about what they're really doing, but they're not willing to tell us.
Okay, final thing. Oh, go ahead.
I would say I do know that, and I don't know, like, I always wonder how much this does. I know at the press conference, President Hargrave had said that they had been contacting specific university presidents and basically asking where the shortcomings are, right? And getting the concrete evidence of what needs to take place.
In specific, the Baylor president, who is the chairwoman and a friend of Dr. Hargrave.
Right, but I don't know, and maybe Tim could answer this. How much help is that actually really in terms of pushing the ticket in by asking presidents and like.
Well, part of that answer that he gave was in response to what were you told when you didn't get in the last time around when it was Houston and Cincinnati and Central Florida and BYU. But in terms of getting in now, they think they addressed the NCAA issues because all the Penny Hardaway stuff is behind them. They think they addressed the academic issues because they feel like they're on strong footing there. And then the other one was the stadium issue. What good does it do? Brett Yormark's not the one who's making this decision.
Right.
It's the presidents and the chancellors and the CEOs of the member institutions. So yeah, it probably does some good to at least find out where the people who are rejecting you, like why they didn't want to go to the prom with you. Yeah,
right.
You know, do I need to comb my hair better? Do I need a breath mint? Like, help me out here.
Yeah. What does the Oklahoma State president think of Memphis? What does the Kansas president? You know, Yormark, you can only court him so much. 5 years from now, are we still talking about the same stuff? Memphis trying to get into a power conference? I mean, the whole landscape may be completely changed in collegiate sports, but I guess what I'm asking you, is there going to be more dominoes, or is it going to stay this way for a while now that a lot of dominoes have fallen?
5 years from now, like, what will the definition of a power conference be? Right? I mean,
right.
and I think that's where, will we still be talking about conference realignment? Yeah, I think so. But in terms of power conference, is the SEC and Big Ten going to be the only two powers, and then it's down from there? I mean, if we're like, what would that be? But as far as conference realignment, I still think we'll be talking about it 5 years from now.
Tim?
5 years from now, I just hope I'm talking. One game at a time, Greg. One game at a time.
It's not called the Doomsday Podcast, Tim. It's called the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast. Guys, it's been a lot of fun. I know these are tough topics, the realignment, the stadium issues. The stadium one will come to fruition here sooner than later. We don't know about realignment, but hopefully it happens. Looking forward to more of these with you guys. I really appreciate it. Frank, thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Greg. It's been a good time.
Tim?
Glad you're doing it, Greg. Happy to have you on board.
It's been a lot of fun. Looking forward to doing this again on a weekly basis. And then after basketball season, we'll do it periodically. There'll always be something to talk about when it comes to the University of Memphis. We want to thank you for joining us for the relaunch of the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with Greg Gaston. In future episodes, you can expect to hear more from Frank, as well as our Daily Memphian Tigers writers, Parth Upadhyay, and of course, Tim Buckley. Be sure to listen to other podcasts by the Daily Memphian, including our Grizzlies podcast, our food podcast, Soundbites, and the Sidebar with Eric Barnes about local arts, culture, and everything in between. Have yourselves a great week.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.